Welcome to Conversation Corners, Worldview and Approaches to Healing Using Wicca as an Example, featuring Ivo Dominguez Jr., Elder of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel. Spirituality and worldview strongly affect the theories and the practices used for healing. In this Conversation Corner, Ivo Dominguez Jr., longtime Wiccan practitioner, will share his perspectives and encourage some fresh examinations of your foundational concepts. Ivo Dominguez Jr. is one of the founders and elders of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel since 1978. He is the anchor author for the new 12-book Witch's Sun Sign series. Ivo is the author of The Four Elements of the Wise, Keys to Perception, Casting Sacred Space, Practical Astrology for Witches, and Pagans and Spirits Speak. In his mundane life, he has been a computer programmer, the executive director of an AIDS/HIV service organization, a metaphysical bookstore owner, and more. Conversation Corners is an initiative that the AHNCC Equality, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice Committee implements. The intent of the Conversation Corners is to increase our worldviews and understanding of other people's lived experiences, perceptions, values, cultures, attitudes, etc., so we can better serve our clients. AHNCC does not endorse or support particular worldviews. Through these dialogues, we hope that we can all learn and grow and better care for those whom we serve. Let's welcome Ivo Dominguez Jr.
Welcome as well, and Melissa. It's my pleasure to have Amingo Dominguez with us. Ivo Dominguez. Sorry, Ivo. Um, it's been
All
one of
good.
those days. And Jim is going to introduce him, but I'm very excited about the topic tonight. And I want to put out that if anybody else wants to share their worldview, we are always excited to have you do that.
Absolutely.
And thank you for being here. And Jim, it's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I'm Jim Welch. Most of you know me. I'm on the board of HNCC and the chair of the EEDIBSJ committee. I would ask persons that have their first names like Melissa and Sam, and Aaron, will you please put your last name in the chat so that Ray can make sure that he can send you your certificate so that you get credit for this conversation corner. It's difficult because sometimes there are multiple people with the same first names. So it's important that you do that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ivo, as most of you know, is my partner, my husband of 47 years now. And he's gonna introduce himself. We've been talking about this, like, how do I introduce you? I've known you for, more than half of my life. I'm 75. So, my mom had said in the late 80s that I needed to go to this thing called Seeds and Bridges. Which at that time was the only holistic nursing program in the early 80s that Vita had and Jane had. And I said, Ivo, so I had to go to this. And he said, yeah, go to this. This is right up your alley. This is who you are. So it was kind of like the encouragement of my mom and Ivo that kind of put me on this path in the late 80s. So I owe a lot to my husband, and here he is. Ivo, go.
Okay, so I'll keep it really short and sweet. I am one of the elders of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, which is a Wiccan religious organization. And I'm also the author of, golly, something like, I don't know, 19 books with like 3 more on the way. So I know a bit about this, but I will say that what I know is not actually the most important part of this. It's about practice. I'm only going to talk a little bit about the
things around. I had to go back and figure out which reference went with what,
Oh dear.
forever because I was too tired to do it, you know.
Jamie, please mute. Thank you.
Okay, we good?
Oh.
So what I'm going to say is I'm going to focus mostly on the ideas or the perspectives that come out of Wicca that are helpful when you're looking at different kinds of healing practices or modalities. But the other thing is the concept of even what religion and spirituality is, and I know that you guys talk about spirituality quite a bit, is informed in different ways. So Wicca is an orthopraxic religion rather than an orthodox religion. What does that mean? If you are doing the thing, the practice, then you are doing Wicca. It's not about having particular belief structures, even though there are belief structures that seem to be fairly widespread in most of Wiccan or other kinds of similar communities. But most of you grew up with the idea of a religion equals a collection of beliefs or codes that you follow. And though Wicca has that as well, it is more heavy on the if you do the following practices, if you celebrate in the following ways, you are being Wiccan or you are being an earth-based religionist. So it's more about what you do than what individual belief you have. I will say that whenever we talk about belief structure within the communities that I'm a part of, it really is looking at it on a bell-shaped curve. There isn't a book that states these are the things that are required beliefs in order to be part of this community. It's how you are with each other and how you are with the world. And I think it's fascinating that, to me, one of the things that I notice all the time is how many different things are done in your community that were part of my community from the time I joined it in the 70s. So, for example, every time that I hear anyone mention grounding or centering, it's like that came out of our community and then infiltrated or spread like any good idea into everywhere else. So there's a connectivity between what the practices are. And actually, I am happy every time that I see one more thing become a prominent part of your community of practice, because Wicca is a community of practice of a different sort. I'm also going to say that the idea of religion and spirituality, let me tell you the way that it is most commonly described from our perspective and see how that jives with the way that you experience it. And a lot of times, unfortunately, many people, when they hear the word religion, depending upon what their family of origin and religion of origin may have been, have a particular automatic set of responses based on what that experience was like when they were growing up in it, whether it felt restrictive, whether it felt inviting, whether it felt limiting, whether it felt supportive. As a disclosure, I was born in Cuba. I was raised Catholic. What a shocking surprise! And so that, you know, there is a range. It's not that I'm unfamiliar with a bunch of things related to other religions and to Orthodox and to monotheistic religions, but here's the part where it's different. Spirituality is something that is deeply personal and unique. Each one of us is the only person experiencing our relationship to the world, to each other, to whatever we view as spirit or higher forms of consciousness. That's purely an individual, and only one person in the world has your spirituality, because it's you. Here's the thing: in a lot of I'm going to use the term pagan as a catch-all umbrella term, even though it's really not the best term, but there's not really a good term to replace it yet. But when you are acting in the world in a way that is in alignment with and congruent with your personal spirituality, that's your religion, whatever it looks like. The way your spirituality nudges you, encourages you, informs how you should be as a human being and what your relationship should be to plants, animals, nature, other human beings. That is an expression of religion from our perspective. When your spirituality incarnates in actions in the physical world, that's religion. And by that definition, it becomes a much broader thing. And it also, for some of us that had perhaps a less than ideal exposure to religion when they were growing up, it takes a little bit of the sting out of the word religion, because I think we need to be able to reclaim all the words and all the areas of culture and that are out there. And being able to say religion without having like a little flinch as you figure out which way, how it does or doesn't apply to you, makes a big difference. The other thing is, it's really easy to actually change your relationship to everything that you do in life, whether it's carrying sacks of topsoil that you're going to be amending your garden with, or doing the dishes, or anything that you do, everything that you begin to think about, how is this action? Or frankly, there are times, I'm sure, that when you are working with people, either in your private life or as part of your work as a holistic nurse, where it is a sacrifice, it is a challenging thing for you, and how you do it is an expression of your religion. So if you, and I know that there's a lot of discussion in your communities about looking to the model of indigenous communities, or communities that are more traditional and intact and still living as they did for many, many centuries or millennia. And in those places, these artificial divisions between spirituality and religion and behavior and action in the world, it's a lot more connected than tight little boxes, which is part of the inheritance of Western industrialized ways of looking at things, and academia as well to some degree. So but you think, so are all Wiccans really into the woo-woo stuff? And the answer is no. As a matter of fact, same's true of you nurses, I am sure, as well. Or it's on a continuum of how far along you are on those things. But what I'm going to suggest is, if you are not expecting people to believe specific things, but are expecting them to act in caring, kind, and connected ways with the world, okay, then it doesn't matter whether or not they believe in some of the things that you believe in. So, for example, I can say that a large number of people in my community believe that everything has spirit. Every plant, every animal, every hillside, that there is no place that is not inspirited. There are also many people like myself who also believe in many expressions of the divine, and we call that multiple kinds of gods and goddesses, or divine presences. You can fill a couple of encyclopedias with different names for all the beings that have been named by humans across the planet to describe different things. And it is possible to believe in all those things, or none of those things, and still be functionally connected to the web of life and the web of community, because ultimately the only thing that matters in this system is the belief in interconnectedness. And even if you don't believe that something is so, treating it as if it were inspirited, treating it as if it were in soul, treating it as if it were alive, even if you don't believe that in a literal sense, makes it actually functionally good for the people that it affects. So there are secular humanists who identify as part of my community. There are people who are atheists or agnostics that identify as my community. But they are also sometimes the most joyous chanters or singers at public rituals when we celebrate the changing of the seasons. And that enriches the community, whether or not they have an ounce of belief about any of the other parts of it that I may believe in fully. There's also not exclusivity. So, for example, we've had several members that also continue to go to Quaker meetings or go to temple. There's a lot of Jew witches. There's a lot because we don't require the release or the ending of your previous religious or cultural ties in order to participate. Because ultimately are you doing something that's good for the world? Are you doing something good for nature? Now, here's some of the things that arise out of looking at that model of interconnectedness. We have an extended sense of reality. And I'm going to suggest that you think of it as an extended sense of reality rather than simply going, well, it's a psychological trick. So why do placebos work? And we could probably have a discussion that would go on for 5 or 6 hours about possible mechanisms, changes in brain chemistry, adjustments in attention, all these different kinds of things. But the point is, we know that certain kinds of ritual actions, certain kinds of songs or prayers, certain kinds of activities, whether or not we have a mechanism of action, we know that they can reduce pain, increase comfort, and any number of things. Now, we also know that if you have people do a guided visualization, that changes their inner reality. And by changing that inner reality, sometimes the body follows suit, or sometimes the other people in the room with them also experience the world differently. You can, if you walk into a place that is identified as a holy place, whether it's a church, a synagogue, or a glen of a circle of trees in the woods, there's an energy there that many people, even if they say I don't feel energy, they experience a shift in their affect. They experience a shift in what's going on. So just adopt the idea of extended reality, because when we do ceremony, when we do ritual, some people are having the full lights and colored special effects because they're sensitive in that way. I actually think that synesthesia is a kind of magic in its own way as well, and something that, and I think it's actually trainable. But the goal of ritual is to create a place of change and transport. You do rituals already. Every time that, and now you, besides when you are officially doing ritual, aren't you doing ritual of a sort when you sit quietly and hold space with someone? Aren't you trying to alter the atmosphere? Aren't you trying to alter the way that the room feels, or how the person feels your presence? So there's a lot of ways to think about it. Here's some, but there are also tools that help you have words for it. So, for example, in many healing modalities, and certainly in Wicca, we work with the 4 elements plus spirit as one model for describing. And that goes back to ancient Greeks and informed the idea of the humors. And it's this idea of the 4 elements being connected to energy and health is something that's long and old and profound. But it also gives you a sense of how to call something to you. If you, like, for example, for us, the element of air is representative of inspiration, of new ideas, of the power of mind, of the power of communication. So that if someone is finding that they do not have words, or that they are lacking inspiration, or they are having trouble with communication, focusing on or listening to the breeze, the wind, the clouds, or simply brushing their hand through the air just to feel the air, anything that connects them with the idea of all the things that are of that element will wake those up. Now, do I actually believe that everything in the universe is made out of those 4 elements? I'm pretty sure there's a thing called the periodic table that would have a different word about that. But functionally, it's true. Functionally, it's true. It is like they are elements of psyche, elements of psychology, elements of spirit, so that if you need to feel grounded, if you need to feel solid, if you need to feel like you can support yourself, then calling upon the solidity of the earth beneath your feet seems like a pretty reasonable thing to do. And we're never far from it. So one of the things that happens when you don't have a book, one of the things about these sorts of spiritual and religious perspectives is that they are not the people of the book, they're the people of the library. That's one of the ways that we phrase it. Now, the library means every book that ever has been, but it also means, like right now, I have a background behind me of a beautiful sunset and some trees and silhouette, because that's also a book of a different sort. So when you are looking at for the symbols that allow you to come up with the right words, come up with the right prayer, come up with the right meditation, it is about digging deeply into those things. There's a author named, she writes as Starhawk. Her legal name's Miriam Simos, who she's a licensed clinical social worker in her past life, if you will. And she came up with the most succinct way of describing it. The approach of these religions, these spiritualities, is they are religions of poetry rather than the law. Rather than looking to specific guidance and specific sets of words, it's about analyzing, reanalyzing, reviewing, and re-experiencing a line of poetry that can be interpreted a dozen different ways. So you look at the world as poetry that is going to be seen differently by every single person, including you. You will continue to see it in a very different way. How many of you look forward to some holidays every year? I know I do. Holidays are very valuable things culturally, religiously, spiritually. In fact, you've probably also seen the situation where people that are just about to transition out of this life will stick around long enough to make sure they make one more holiday, or it's not an unusual thing. Well, here's one of the things that you'll find in common, and something that I'm encouraging everyone to do, because it's not how about this? It doesn't violate whatever your religious or spiritual perspective is, to pay attention to the seasonal changes of the world around you and be happy about them. If you just did that, you've kind of like, that's like step one to doing a thing that matters. But here's why it's even more important now than ever from my perspective. We've really done a number to the earth. We are teetering at the edge of all sorts of kinds of ecological and meteorological disaster every day, and I believe in reduction of harm as a good approach, because frankly, right now we can't fix this, but we can reduce the harm. And one of the things is to not fall out of touch with the natural world. So all the holidays that we follow are actually lined up with the changes of the seasons, or with the lunar phases. Why does that matter? Because it makes us pay attention to the physical world. Because I won't suggest this to you, but one of my dear friends, she goes in for doing it in the most extreme way possible sometimes. Her name's Gwendolyn Reese. She's a Dr. Gwendolyn Reese, and she's a professor and librarian. And she realized how much our lives have been shaped by the fact that we can have light whenever we want it. We can turn on electrical lights anytime we want, and we can defy the cycles of day and night and the change over it. So she went an entire year without using the lights in her apartment. She did allow herself to have a couple of candles here then as necessary, and to use a little electric lantern as absolutely necessary. But for all intents and purposes, she decided to live a year making friends with the how long is the day, how long is the night, and not living on. And by the way, it was good for her physically. She actually felt much better. She stopped doing it because it doesn't really jive with her work life, but that was an extreme example of it. But even if you just pay attention to planning on doing something for the spring equinox every year, planning on doing something for the longest day, the longest night. We do 8 holidays, but honestly, if you just think of the 4 seasonal changes that are announced broadly and in secular ways every year, and decide what you're going to do as you turn the wheel of the year, because we call it the wheel of the year, and focus on what that. Now, there's another thing that happens when you start paying attention to which. Now, well, you're going to ask, well, how am I going to pay attention to this? Well, which trees do you have trees that are budding out yet? Do you have any little crocus that are beginning to, or anything else poking up out of the ground? Or are there particular birds that you only see when you cross a certain boundary in the time of year? But my point is, having a cycle of celebration of what's happening in the world around you makes it easier not to forget. Because I have the luck, privilege to be able to be out in nature a lot, because I live out in the middle of nowhere and we have a big garden. So it's really easy for me and Jim to spend time where we are very much connected with this is what we're going to eat, and we try to eat what's actually growing in that time rather than what was flown in from wherever it came in on, just so that I can satisfy my desire for strawberries in October. So the point is, if you can just think about that connection to seasonality, that will begin. Oh, by the way, pay attention to where you live. Now, why am I saying it that way? It's really easy as some of us begin to explore, especially those of us that are exploring our ancestry and where our people came from and whatever, and maybe get excited about looking at the holidays that they celebrated. And I have celebrated some holidays that are not local to me, but the more local the holiday, the better. So, for example, for me, spring equinox and daffodils are always together because we consistently have them together. Do you know what I'm saying? Pay attention. What's actually in bloom where you are? What trees, what flowers, what birds? What's the most characteristic weather that happens at that time of year? Pay attention, become local. Being local is one of the essential things to actually being grounded and centered in a spirituality that is present here, present now. Can I have a sip of tea? All right. I'm going to say something about, oh, by the way, I'm going to say something about moon cycles, because probably all of you have, heard the idea of women's cycles and the moon and yada, yada, even though there are some women whose cycles are, roughly 28, 29 days and whatever. It's more of a mythic experience of having a connection to the moon than not, right? Do you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? Menstrual cycle primarily. Well, guess what? The moon is about those cycles, and obviously each individual is different. But something I learned a long time ago, and it's one of those places where if you believe, by the way, you can believe in science and believe in all the strange stuff. Otherwise, you wouldn't be holistic nurses. So, what I discovered when I was in college, and I worked on a sex information hotline, and there was this like 60-hour training session. It was a long thing. But I discovered that there was a 2.5 day cycle on average. Remember, this is averages. Every 2.5 days is men go through the entire cycle of hormones that women do in the 28 or 29 days. In other words, we have our own version of follicle stimulating hormone that triggers the generation of new sperm. So every 2.5 days, there's a new batch of sperm created and released. Why am I pulling this back up to the moon again? Because the moon spends about 2.5 days in each of the zodiacal signs as it goes through its cycle. So in both cases, men and women, it's about pulling the tides that bring life to the world. One of the things that I find connecting to nature is I will go out of my way to try to find ways in which things that occur in nature biology also end up being something that is connected to these other larger cycles. There's a phrase that we repeat often, and not just in Wicca, but almost any kind of paganism, and that comes from Hermetics, and you may have heard some variation of it, and it's as above, so below, but in a different manner, or some variation on those phrases. Well, honestly, that is the single biggest thing that says there is a connective tissue. There is a web of connection between all things large and small, and the smallest thing reflects the largest thing, and everything in between is, connecting wheels within wheels. It's the reason why when we look at an atom, a depiction of an atom and a depiction of the solar system, we immediately go, yes, that looks right. It's the reason why if you are going through a passage through two mountains that's been cut out so that you can pass the road through it, and you see the folded layers of rock because the rock was slowly folded to curve up and form those mountains. Well, you know what? If you get a closer look, you'll find that there are smaller folds inside the folds, and it's forever recursive. A smaller is smaller echo, larger echo, so that all the small things are connected to the large things. Now, why does that matter? Okay. When you have people together holding similar hopes, feelings, emotions, for a moment, those two tiny people that are sitting next to each other, their energy blends to a degree. And then the next person next to them, and next. And soon you have a cluster. So now you don't have this one tiny little dot. You have this collection of people, all who are producing a similar vibration, a similar harmony between them. That's what happens when you do group work of any kind. Have you not noticed? I'll compare it to something really mundane, and then I'll compare it to something not mundane. You've probably been to conferences or weekend workshops where where it feels like the world is different inside the confines of that conference or that convention center or that retreat center, because for X period of time you are as a group intentionally trying to be in harmony or in communion or have your energies connected to each other. Well, one of the things that happens when you do that is that you become a less granular, less grainy. It's not as low res. You become a better resolution picture of the large thing called the universe. Each of us is a tiny little pixel, if you will, in the picture that forms up the universe. But when a bunch of us get together and try to harmonize, then the picture becomes a little bit clearer for every single one. I'm going to go non-local. Here's the extra woo-woo stuff. Do you know what I mean by non-local as a phrase? Is that a term that's used in this community? Okay, how about strange action at a distance and quantum entanglement? Okay, that's kind of like the I hate resorting to science sometimes because it gets overused, but the truth of it is that if there is a connection between two things, that connection is retained even when they are physically separated from each other. Now, there are people on this call that I know have had the experience, or have friends that have had the experience of knowing that a loved one was in trouble on the other side of the country, or that the phone was about to ring because somebody needed desperately to speak with you, or something of that nature. Because you could say, well, it's being transmitted over the distance, or you can simply say it's non-local. There is no distance if the things have been in resonance or are connected to each other. The distance vanishes and is not relevant. So one of the things that I would say happens with magical folks is that we intentionally try to remember and internally invoke the idea of, we remember what it felt like when we were gathered together, standing, holding hands in a circle. We remember what it felt like when we were at that conference or that retreat. We remember when we were standing in the woods together. And then we can be on opposite sides of the country and still feel connected in a similar fashion. By the way, we have anecdotal, didn't do experiments, but we had anecdotal proof that we could do. We didn't think we could do it at first, but then we decided, hey, guess what? We are actually successfully doing ritual over Zoom during the COVID lockdown days. Had to adapt, had to do things differently, but the energy was still connected. And it didn't, and this is why I'm saying it's a different kind of energy, because the distance did not diminish the sense of connection. And that's a very different kind of thing. By now it should be fairly clear that there's a lot of echoes of a lot of the things that are broadly used or conceived of as being packaged with being Wiccan or being pagan or any of the other things, with many of the things that you do. Frankly, the thing that perhaps is most telling to me is that everybody on this planet right now seems to be, and I'm using I'm saying every, which is, so I'm going to the extreme word. I'm not using any weasel words or qualifiers to weaken that up. we are in a time of crisis, and when that happens, your options are to open up or to shut down. And the desire to shut down is pretty intense right now. So I am encouraging you to use any and every tool at your disposal to bolster yourself up and bolster each other up. So if any of these ideas sound like something you might want to think about, go for it. Probably some of you have run into the idea of maiden, mother, and crone, the mother goddess and being or the goddess being represented in a threefold fashion. It's an idea that some people like, some people don't like. But here's the part that I encourage you to lean into. You are all of who you are from the moment you're born to the moment you died. And time is a little bit more slippery than most of us would imagine, and that's what we believe. So, for example, I am of an age where a lot of my friends are complaining. Well, besides the fact that a lot of my friends are not here anymore, a lot of my friends are complaining that it's not as easy as it used to be to make friends. Well, we could talk about lots of sociological reasons and, post-industrial blah blah blah, modernism blah blah blah. There's a lot of and the lack of communities, the lack of extended family. There's a lot of reasons that people can explain. I don't care about those for the moment. Here's what I know is useful. If you are the totality of who you are from the moment you were born to the moment you depart, then your past and your future are in your hand. And if you call forth from dig back and summon up, this is my energy when I was 11 or 10 or whatever age seems golden to you. Because if you can remember who you were when you were a young pup, it'll make it easier to make friends, because kids have no trouble, at least most kids have very little trouble making friends and are willing to at least give a chance on a friendship. So, or if you are if somebody's in their 20s and they're saying, I don't know. Okay, imagine yourself as you when you are in your 50s or 60s or 70s, telling yourself a pep story about what you needed to do and what would have helped. Become who you will be and who you were, because we view time in a different way, and that changes who you are. It changes who you are when you give yourself the gift of being all your ages, and then you don't worry as much about I'm too young, I'm too old, I'm in the awkward middle place. All those things melt away when you decide that yeah. And saying time is a number doesn't have a strong enough impact. Actually make it a thing where you imagine this is who I was, or this is who I will be, or in my case, I will actually call that up and become that self again. Because whether or not you believe in reincarnation, I do. You don't have to. And even though many people in my community believe in reincarnation, a lot of people say it's hogwash, and both opinions are fine. But I will say that I have proof of reincarnation of a sort. I will bet as much money as I have that who I was when I was 13 is a very different person than who I was when I was 20 and who I was when I was 30 or 50. My point is, I have lived multiple incarnations, because there's chunks of my life that's a different person. Not really, but it is a whole chapter of identity and perspective that I can remember I was that, but I am not that now. So I think most of us have reinvented ourselves, or time has done the job for us multiple times, and that is proof that we are capable of accessing all those different selves that we've been before and will be in the future, because you already have the promise of who you will be already lined up inside. I do think that if it's possible, when you are examining the things that you are feeling a little bit uncomfortable with, and this is me looking at what I know of your community and practices, you go through probably as much as we do as our community, discussions around what's too strange, what's too weird, what's believable, what's provable, what's beyond the pale. How do I need to dress this up or phrase it properly so that the powers that be will be able to cope with it, or some variation thereof? I mean, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a necessary thing that you come up with the right languaging in order to make things accessible or to not be prevented from doing things. But I'm going to ruffle some feathers, but I know dozens and dozens of people that do some kind of energy healing work from the perspective of, I'm doing Reiki, or I'm doing therapeutic touch, or I'm doing chakra balancing, or I'm doing polarity therapy, or there's like a lot of modalities, and that's fine because that's true in anything. I mean, if we were talking talk therapy, there's bazillion different schools and techniques for everything that you do. But the essence of it is pretty much, how about this? In the same way that the universe is made out of the four elements plus spirit and or the periodic table, when you look at most of the techniques, what I'm going to encourage you to do, regardless of what languaging you need to use to make it acceptable or to get it past the gatekeeper of whatever institution that you're trying to get through, is focus on what are the common things that must be true. Well, all of them work with energy. All of them work with feeling. And by feeling, I don't just mean sensation or emotion, but a non-verbal knowing, and frankly, non-representational more often than not, where you don't have words or images attached to it either. So there's energy, there's some sense of feeling or non-verbal knowing. And here's the part that's tricky. All of you, depending upon your perspective, are connecting with something that is akin to spirit or essence in order to know what to do next. Where's the guidance coming from? You might call it intuition. Well, when we call it intuition, that's awesome. But honestly, it's like trying to figure out where the words are that are in your normal waking consciousness. You're listening to me right now and you're forming your own ideas. And from somewhere tiny, it's like, have you ever looked at a glass filled with carbonated stuff, whether it's seltzer or ginger ale or whatever it is that you like, and the bubbles are so tiny at the bottom, they're barely visible. And by the time they get to the top, they get huge. Those little bubbles rising are a great way to imagine the place deep inside where your words and images and consciousness is arising from. And then finally, when it gets to the surface, the bubble gets big enough and it pops, and you actually have the thought or you have the image. But where is it coming from? Someplace very deep down. And that is also true. None of the healing modalities that are energy based can work unless some part of you is tuning into some kind of source of guidance or information. Now, you can create a framework of these are the steps that you do as part of a protocol or a pattern for ritual, for healing work of any kind, and those are to make sure that you get there. They're like the signpost on the road or the painted line so that you can get there, but they're not the thing itself. So aren't we all just the conduit? Somebody just put into the chat. I keep forgetting to look at the chat. Yeah, but conduits have shape, and conduits have texture, and conduits have diameter, and some are straight and some are squiggly, so that each of us is a kind of a conduit. But what I'm going to continue to say is start paying attention to what's this made out of at the lowest level or the most foundational level you can imagine, as a way of getting a deeper sense of it and also feeling more empowered to do more. I don't care what something is called in most cases. There are some exceptions if that's what's necessary to get through the door. But I do think that you can go so much deeper if you allow yourself to explore what's underneath that layer that we've put on top that's there to make us feel safer. I'm going to make a distinction also between soul and spirit that we make in our system. So most of us have the belief in something akin to the idea of a divine spark. Or you can think of that divine spark as really being more the thread that connects you back to the source of all things. And It existed before I was born, will exist after I'm out of this body. But soul is not that thing, that's spirit, that's eternal, lives outside of space and time as we know it. The part that got poured into the vessel that looks like my body, that's the soul, because that only happens once. Each lifetime is unique and individual. This is you don't even have to do the reincarnation bit. So the part of you that actually is doing the walk on this planet and move it, slogging through time, doing the things and whatever, is changed. It learns, it gets experiences. Part of you is always out there in eternity and connected to the rest of the universe. But that part of you and the part of you that is here don't reunite until after you depart this body.
Do you want to talk about the bulb?
Oh yeah. Just real quickly about we believe in reincarnation as well. And I'm just going to give you another. This is an example of physical metaphor in nature. As you might have gathered, I really like daffodils. So let's say that I have one big daffodil bulb, and I plant it in a hillside. If the soil is good and it's got a good exposure, so it's going to get enough sunlight and water, if a year or two after that, 2 flowers will come up, and then eventually 3 and 4, and eventually the bulb will grow and split, and make many, many, many more, until it's the whole hillside of beautiful yellow flowers. So let's look at one flower, and then we'll return to the hillside. So imagine that the dirt represents the boundary between before life. So the bulb is in that deep, dark, beautiful place that contains all the mystery of the universe, and it sends up a couple of leaves, feels the light, goes upwards, eventually makes a bulb, the flower bud opens up, it's a daffodil, yay, and then eventually shrivels and goes back in, dies. So basically, every year is a cycle of life. The daffodil is born and reborn. Every year, the leaves are a little bit different. The flower is a little bit different. Sometimes it gets big enough and it decides to split. But it is so that the daffodil is like the process of life and death and rebirth. And if you believe in reincarnation, eventually when the bulb has enough experience, it splits and becomes 2 bulbs, and then 3 bulbs, and then 4 bulbs. So that looking to the natural world and telling a story about it, which, by the way, almost every culture looks at plants and animals and seasons and hillsides and rivers and comes up with a story to explain something. And unfortunately, I'm going to use the C word. The colonial perspective is always to assume that that it is a C word. The colonial perspective is always to assume that the things that are being taught and are told as stories to explain things are a primitive expression of trying to explain something that science would do a better job at. No, just no. Because, and the problem is that if you assume that all of the myths and all the stories are nothing but lowbrow science or a way to provide a reason or an explanation, then you close off the door to actually exploring the mystery of what it actually means. So who knows how many stories and how many myths and how many bits of lore in communities have been thrown out or ignored simply because, oh, that's just stupid stuff that the primitive people, or I should say the non-industrialized European, people that weren't European and weren't industrialized yet. So my point is that the stories that are going to reinvigorate us tend to be ones that are drawn from the things that we already have access to in the natural world. And I know if you're an urban person and a city dweller, you go, well, what do I do? Well, you know what? You do have parks, and you do have trees, and you do have weather. There is just you can't get away from being in nature just because you live on the 18th floor. It's you're still in nature. Feel the sway of the building. I do think that if we do our job in this next couple of years, next 10, 20 years, as individuals and communities, we will come out the other side of this with a return to seeing things that are generative, things that are healthy, things that encourage us to feel better and feel healthier and have quality of life to become more important. And it's a lot easier to be kinder to the other people around you if you've already decided that plants, animals, and the planet are also alive and worthy of care.
There were a couple things, Evo, in the chat.
I'm
Bridget
sorry.
said, you're good. Super interesting perspective on age. And then Bonnie, Fern said, aren't we all just the conduit? And then Bonnie said, we are all open fields of energy so we can find the energy sources that resonate most beautifully for us.
And sometimes I'm going to say something about the resonating energy thing, and this is something that can be a great resource for each of you, with each other especially. We forget, and we don't necessarily shut down, but we forget that there's a broader range of energies available to us. Do you have things that you? I'm being attacked. I'm being mauled by a dog. If you probably have things that you like because you are good at them, or things that you find a natural connection to, so that you develop a habit of, that's going to be my go-to for when I need to calm down, or when I need to do a particular energy thing, or this is the kind of breath work or counted breathing I do when I need to do the following. And that's good, and that's great. But it's really easy for all of us to, in the process of finding these are my reliable things and what resonates with us, to neglect the things that are not our home base. So sometimes I will actually intentionally ask one of my friends to raise energy or move energy or do a meditation that I don't do at all, or I don't get much out of, so that I can listen and feel carefully to see if I can figure out, why does it work for her? And it's about re-exploring. Like, I can tell you that when I was of a certain age, I thought that Brussels sprouts were, concentrated evil. I mean, they were. No, nowadays, you can say, well, the adult palate, blah blah blah. I love Brussels sprouts now, but the thing is, when it comes to practices or energy work or breathing exercises or whatever, sometimes what you thought was not for you 6 years ago, suddenly now is the time in which you are or open to or appropriate to experience it. So I periodically recommend hitting the reset. And I'm going to say something that is not part of Wicca in a sense, but inspired or informed by a community that encourages exploration. Something that's one of my personal practices is, if a year ends with a 0 or a 5, basically every 5 years, when it hits a 0 or 5, I intentionally listen to music that I don't know anything about, or genres, or try to read genres I've never read before, or watch news that I haven't looked at before, or eavesdrop on social media on conversations and communities that I'm not a part of. And I say eavesdrop because I don't want to say anything, because I'm not there. I'm not there as to make my statement or my opinion. I'm there to listen. But basically, it's in the calendar. Basically, every 0 and 5 year is a reinvent my connection to the world year, to see what's come up, what's new. And frankly, periodically I find, I love this book. I'm now going to find a book that has come out in the last 3 years that is on the same topic, to see what people are talking about now. Because the other thing is, you have to believe that you're going to be immortal, because you are, in a sense. And that means that you have to constantly reinvent your connection to the world. And you discover new capacities to do things.
Are there questions from people?
Jim, I wanted to just say about the statement that Evo just shared about reinventing and reconnecting. It ties in so beautifully about how life I don't know that I'm going to say circular or spiral of how we revisit things different, like the Brussels sprouts. Like I couldn't stand broccoli. I thought my mother didn't know I was spitting it in the napkin
Yep.
and then running to have to go to the bathroom. And and my mom shares a story about how she tore the breadcrumbs off and there was a little space where they ate. And she never wondered where all the breadcrumb, I mean, all the crust,
All
all
the
the
crust.
crust went, right? And so these are universal things we have, and I love the hope that comes with revisiting things in a new
Mhm.
way and having the challenges and adventures along the way that get us to reconnect with something that we weren't able to necessarily reconnect with at a younger age. Thank you.
I have something to say. What you're talking about reincarnation reminded me of a Bob Dylan song,
Mhm.
My Back Pages. I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So, Evo, I'm seeing Jen, right, your hands up and I'm acknowledging it. I'm also seeing a lot of people coming in who we probably had a time a time lag here. Usually our conversation corners for future are 6 p.m. EST so that it doesn't get too late. But I also know for the rest of you coming in, it's a problem. So you are not going to want to miss a word of this conversation corner, and it will be recorded. So if you're coming in at the end, know that you can catch it out
Yep.
there. It will be recorded and it won't be lost.
Right. There is a recording that you can get, and also to remind people, if you're on Facebook, if you just have your first name, please put your last name in the chat so that Ray can make sure that you get your
Credits.
certificate for being part of this. Okay, Jan, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Evo. And I have really appreciated this conversation and lots of food for reflection later. And so I was thinking about what you were saying, whether it's reincarnation, beyond lives or within our own lives, the
Mhm.
many times we reinvent. And I was thinking of a connection, and certain many of us have these connections with our loved ones that have passed, but maybe even
Yes.
others. I have a connection with maternal grandmother who I wasn't close to in this life, but she shows up, quite frequently in different ways and these stories. And so I was wondering what Wicca says about, or maybe it doesn't, and maybe, or even your personal belief of where that space is. And it could be the space between lives, between worlds, but that's, as a poet and channeling things from different spaces, like, do you have any insights or thoughts on that space?
And we're talking about the liminal space where the dead interact with us.
Right.
Well, time is a lot more slippery than any of us give it credit for. So I would say that it is possible to commune with or communicate or have a connection to ancestors that come up to us in our dreams or in liminal waking states or meditative states. And that ancestor, in one sense, is still alive in their own time frame. In another sense, has passed on and is reaching back to us. And in another sense, if I believe that it's possible for them to have already been reincarnated and still part of them is in the other side and continues, because time is not a simple thing. So I will also say that when in Wicca, one of the things that is a common teaching is the hope for those of us that believe in the reincarnation part, and it's not required, the hope is to be reborn and to find those that we loved again. So the idea that with that there's a hope of returning and being in the lives in some fashion of people that we've been with before. There's another bit that's a little different, and that is there are the mighty dead, and the mighty dead are viewed as being kind of like ancestors with a capital A. So, for example, let's say somebody is so powerful in impact in their family or in their village or in their city that people are telling stories about all the good they did or all the important things that they did for generations, right? Okay. We believe that sometimes what happens is somebody who is in the same role will put on the robe of office that's Aunt Clara or whatever it was, and will show up speaking on behalf of what Aunt Clara would have done, though it's no longer her. She's moved on. She's done her thing. She's moved on in the universe. But that's why folk heroes and folk saints come into being, where you have people that they become almost like an office or a role or a pillar of the community on the other side. And if you wait enough generations, there's eventually statues and shrines, and you know what I'm saying. I think it's a little bit more complicated. Identity is a very complicated thing in a single human being. Now imagine how infinitely more interesting identity is when you're no longer encumbered by a physical body or linear time. And if two people that care about each other can become very close in life, imagine what two people being close to each other where there's no longer the boundary of the skin, where soul to soul blends. So what kind of beings will that produce? It's a very complicated thing. And how about this? Most of us, and this is actually true in many cultures, believe in a lot of different kinds of gods, goddesses, spirits, and everything in between. It's a whole ecology of beings because there's many possibilities.
Thank you.
Fern said, isn't time really an artificial construct? There's really no time.
I would say I half agree. I've heard that phrase a number of times, and so time as we describe it, that's a construct, absolutely. But I also believe that there are many flavors of time and many layers of time. There's time that behaves like a river. There's time that behaves like the ocean that is in all directions, and there's time that behaves like the infinite space and all things at once. So that there are different kinds of time, and I think that we just don't know enough to be able to name all the layers of them. There are probably more dimensions of time than there are physical dimensions.
Marcy?
Yeah, so first, thank you so much, Evo, for sharing this. And I'm going to say it brings me back to long before I was a nurse, when I was performing, so many people I knew, especially in the Renaissance world and stuff, were Wiccan.
Yeah.
And even before that, in a way, it was it was my first connection to feeling grounded in my spirituality in a way that my traditional religion didn't allow me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like as I would be invited and to go to new moon ceremonies and things like that. And I thought, oh, this makes sense to me. Now it's very similar. Judaism has new moon ceremonies too, but I didn't grow up knowing about them and going to them. So it was very interesting to understand that, oh, well, that's like Rosh Chodesh. So there is an overlap among so many religions and rituals. Yeah. But Wiccan really honors the earth. And one of the things I just wanted to ask, and you gave us some ideas, but when I think of my life before a nurse, which was so much more, sadly, so much more spiritual, and I became much more science oriented when I became a nurse, even though holistic nursing kind of helped me find a balance. You talk so much about nature, and I'm thinking, in addition to nature, especially because I live in New York City, I can go to a park, I can have a plant, but I can feel the breeze or the sun. But what are the ways that we return more deeply to those intuitive connections of earth, of spirit, of soul, because I definitely, in my younger years, I was more connected than I am now, if that makes sense.
Something you could try that is fairly straightforward is plan a trip to the park or to a market, ideally an open air market. But before you do that, take some time to calm down, meditate, and imagine that you are moving your focus. Like most of us think that we're up here where our eyes are. We think that our center of consciousness is right back here because that's how we see the world. Imagine that you're moving your center of consciousness until it's the top of your head, maybe a few inches above it, and try to walk to the park or walk through that market, except pretend, because pretending makes it so, that your focus of sight, your focus of consciousness is a little glowing ball above your head. And basically take a little step closer to being connected to the whole of things, while still being close enough to be tethered to your body. So basically allow other senses to take over. One of the things that most people do, especially if you live in an urban environment, or though it's true anywhere, is that the normal waking consciousness that's listening to me right now is kind of like clutching the steering wheel of the car of life, in kind of like this death grip, and doesn't want to cede control to the other senses or to the other kinds of consciousness in you. So you kind of have to like loosen the grip on that wheel, and by pushing and imagining that your consciousness is centered above your head, it allows you to be more in your energy body and less in your physical body. So you're going to get a little bit more cross-play with those kinds of impressions. And the way you'll notice it is you'll walk past, and maybe you'll allow yourself to disbelieve at first. But let's say you're walking in this market, and out of the corner of your eye there's a glow above where all the apples are. So I need to buy some of those apples. There's something about those. Or so allow yourself to be guided by these little nudges, because with some exceptions, not involving tumors or pharmaceuticals, most of us do not experience those first visions or those first connections of this greater reality in Pixar quality, full color animation style. We don't see the special effects. So we tend to erase or underplay or nudge out of our consciousness that we actually are tuning into the things around us. So pushing your consciousness up makes a little bit of difference, and knowing that the goal is to cede control to other parts of you that are deeper and older and perhaps wiser than the ones that have been developed to function in modern society.
I love that. Thank you. And I also love that when I do Reiki on patients, I will, because for some of them it's their first time,
Right.
I will invite them to actually imagine a glowing orb that slowly, gently going into their body. So I just have to allow myself to do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the goal is to be able to walk with one foot in this world and one foot in all the other ones at the same time. But you have to feel safe enough to do that. And that's, the other.
Evo, Fern asked, does Wicca believe that we tend to reincarnate together in different roles for our evolution?
I will say I do believe that, and I will say that many Wiccans do, but Wicca doesn't make you have to believe anything. Like I said, there's not a requirement. I mean, I know a lot of people that are part of my broader pagan community who don't believe in reincarnation, actually, who don't believe that anything happens after you're dead. You're just compost, which is fine, and they're happy with that because it feeds the earth, and that's okay. I do think it's a little complicated. I will. Personal disclosure, Jim and I have bumped into each other a couple other lifetimes as well, and we both have little matching things. Though the last time we were on Earth together at the same time, we were both monks in a monastery, which was But Jim's mom, who encouraged him to do this, was identified as a reincarnation of a family member by her daughters. So Anyway, I do believe it, but I also believe it's way more complicated. And I haven't watched this movie, but there's a movie called Eternity out there right now. That the premise of the movie is that this lady shows up in heaven, and where you're supposed to spend the rest of eternity with your beloved, and she's been married twice, and they're both there. So let's multiply that by 10,000 lifetimes, or however long you've been around. So so that the only part where I'm going to say don't go there is the idea that every single time it's going to be with people. You've probably collected a number of people over the generations of lifetimes that you've been through, that if you believe in this, or you're likely to encounter, and you're always going to have some new ones as well. It's way more complicated. And you can't tell. There's a whole lot of spiritual bypassing, and that's potential with all this stuff. And there's all sorts of other problems. One short thing, and I know we're past time. One of my
We have all the time, Evo, that you give us.
one of my teachers, Dolores Ashcroft Nowitzki, who passed away a few months ago, great teacher, but she was asked once. She was visiting a psychiatric facility in the UK. She's British, and because one of her students asked about a patient that they saw in the common room, and they asked Dolores, what do you think? What kind of horrible thing did that person do to have this lifetime where they're being, the point was they were blaming the person for being a mess and a wreck, because they were in the state they're in. And Dolores looked at her and said, well, we don't really have the capacity to come to that conclusion. She says, for all I know, and this is Dolores, and Dolores says, and I actually think this might be the case. Dolores said, what if that person over there that has multiple personalities that you are seeing as must have been pretty bad in some lifetime to get that, is actually a highly evolved spirit who has chosen to enter into this life with this other personality in order to be part of their therapeutic process? How do we know? We don't know. So that you can't tell by anyone's infirmity or trouble. It's kind of like the problem with Susan Sontag's question of diseases metaphor. Have you read that book? It came out a long time ago, but you get the idea. Blaming somebody or assuming that their illness or disease process is in some way connected to some physical, psychological, moral, spiritual failing, et cetera, et cetera. Not that we can't do a number on ourselves with all those things, but it's way more complicated. And I see Jim dropped in The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell. And there's a lot of Joseph Campbell stuff out there. He was professor. And here's lots of good interviews with Bill Moyers, lots of good books. Here's the part where I will warn you if you're an academic. He is thoroughly in disfavor in academia right now. And if we wait another 20 years, he'll be seen as valuable. Here's his mistake. He is a person of his time period and age, which means he did not have the privilege of knowing how to loosen up his ideas about certain things. So there's a lot of wisdom in Joseph Campbell's works. But you'll read a lot of modern criticism about how, Joseph Campbell, that's so old school, and the monomyth of here's his sin in modern terms. Then I'll shut up. He tries to make sure that everything in human culture, all over time and all over space, is shown as being connected, is shown as having commonality. And that part is true, but we are currently in a time period where the important work nowadays is for us to not minimize differences between different peoples and cultures, but to emphasize them so they can be brought out and let them shine. So he was really focused on, here's the way all humans are humans. And at this moment in history, academia and the world is more interested in, here are the ways in which we are distinctly, absolutely different from everybody else. Do you get what I'm saying? Anyway, it has value. I always enjoy his work.
Mickey?
I want to comment, Evo, about a little bit ago, you talked about complications, and it's complicated. And, I think about, if you think about spiritual energy, there's really no way you can hold on to it, right? It's very ethereal. It interfaces and connects and is constantly synergistically working with all that's around them. So I think that as human beings, we talk about having a human being a human being in a physical body to do our spiritual work, right?
Yeah.
And I liked your distinction between spiritual and soul. So I think I've found that very interesting. But if we think about energy not being created or destroyed, right?
Mhm.
And energy doing it, it simplifies it, because if I sit there and think about human form, I loved your example of two husbands or four husbands or whatever. Then you're trying to pass on a physical body versus thinking about us as spiritual beings. I don't know if that makes sense, but I really appreciated what you had to say about that. Thank you.
There's one thing about energy, and if, in order to understand anything that's less tangible, more subtle, more ethereal, whichever words you prefer, it's always important to ground it back in an explanation that's in the physical world. So let me say something about energy and sound as a comparison. So, have you ever had a neighbor or where they were having a loud party, and you could absolutely hear the even the lyrics are coming through, so you can for all intents and purposes you are standing next to their speakers and you are hearing the whole song and the whole band, right? Now imagine now that neighbor was not next door but was 3-4 blocks away, and it was still loud enough for you to hear it with your windows open. But at that distance, some of the higher notes are kind of muffled. You can't make out the lyrics anymore, but you can tell people are singing. And then instead, what if the neighbor was even another 4 blocks down the way? And at that distance, all you hear is the midtones and the thump of the drums. And if it's far enough away, all you hear is the thump. Different kinds of energy can travel further and still be discernible and clear, whereas others have a short range in which that they are clear and focused. The reason I bring that up is because energy is energy, but energy has qualities in the same way that sound has frequencies or color has frequency wavelengths as well. So the different kinds of energy will have different ranges in which they are clear. And there will also be some things that are like the lowest tone. I'm using the sound metaphor is the hum that connects all of us everywhere, no matter what distance. But there's some things that work better when we are close physically because of the nature of that specific energy. Do you get the idea? So energy is energy, but energy also is diverse, but it follows rules. We just have to figure out what the rules are for which kind of energy and what physical thing we can compare it to that allows us to grapple with the idea of it.
Jamie had a thought. I don't know whether you can read it in the chat.
Yeah. So our brains are just a filter for how we perceive the world. Yep, absolutely. We all have different brains. We can see things, others may not. Take bees, for instance, they see a world of colors humans do not. These colors are very real, even though as humans we cannot see them. Is to say someone who hears or sees thing actually wrong. Their filter doesn't work well, or their filter just doesn't work well for their human existence. I think that, yeah, I do typos all the time when I try to type things in the computer or my phone. Yeah, I mean, the thing is we have different filters. I think the thing, I don't have to explain neuroplasticity to the people in this room. So what I'm going to say is that that's not just for recovering from strokes or something else. We have the capacity to rewire to a degree, and that rewiring process can sometimes open up connection sensitivities to experiencing vibrations, energies that we would otherwise not be as good at. And it helps when you can actually connect it to something. That's why a simple exercise to try is simply run through the gamut of your physical senses. If you're trying to tune into something, do I see anything? Do I hear anything? Do I smell anything? Does it feel like a temperature? Does it feel like a texture? Just run through the gamut of the senses that you already know well, and see if it tickles any of them as a way of trying to, oh, maybe I can make a fresh connection to that. If I can connect that pickup of that energy to that sensation that's already hardwired in my brain, then maybe I can hang on to it. I think that by the way, I think that most magical people are some flavor of neurospicy, neurodivergent. Though not all of them in the normal categories, because I don't think we've found all the categories. And my dears, I have to walk the dogs.
So, for those of you who came in a little later, please put your last name in the chat so that Ray is able to make sure that he can give you contact credits for this. Also, Evo has recorded it, so he'll send it to Ray, and we'll make sure that that is then uploaded onto our website so that you'll be able to listen to the whole thing for those of you that may not have been able to be here from the beginning. I wanna thank Evo. What can I say, honey? For for doing this tonight. He was one of the inspirations, along with my mom, for me to get into holistic nursing, and I'm very lucky to have continued to be with him for 47 years. 3 more years will be 50. So that's a long time to be with the same person. So I want to thank you all for being here. This is wonderful. It was a wonderful discussion. If you have other questions, you can send them to me or directly to Evo. Do you want to put your email in the chat,
Yeah.
Evo?
Sure.
So
Jim, can
yeah,
I
hon.
say something real quick?
Yes,
I
sweetie.
want to apologize for having the time wrong. There's been a lot going on, and we got the time misprinted, as several of you know. I am so thankful that you came and you got to hear the live portion, because you're going to be able to hear all the other live portion, but this gave you the opportunity to ask questions or interact with ourselves, each other, and the speaker. So my apologies to you, those of you that got the information incorrectly. And what I will say is, Conversation Corner, we do try to do at 6 o'clock Eastern all the time, so that we don't keep the people on the East Coast up too late. But I know it's a hard sell for those on the West Coast. And one of the things I would ask you to think about with this is, Evo talked about different perceptions. And I was so thrilled to see a high turnout for this, because we had some people that were concerned about the topic. And what we put out there was, this is not, and Evo talked about kind of getting around, Marcy and I had the conversation when we put out the social media statement about um Petty in Minnesota, and Marcy said, "Can we use the word murder?" And I said, "We're going to call it what it is." So I think that's one of the things that we try to be true to who we are. We don't try to exclude, but what I said is, Conversation Corners is about increasing our awareness of other people's worldviews. So it's not about saying, oh, Evo's the only right one, or Marcy's the only right one, or you got to do it my way. It's about coming together so that we are greater as a community and can better serve those we are serving. So I invite you to invite others to watch this or any other Conversation Corner. There is no charge. They are out there, and they're out there. It is our pleasure when people share them, whether it's students or colleagues. And if you have something you want to share with us, we'd love to hear from you.
Right.
So
Please,
thank you.
please email me or email Mickey if you're interested in doing a Conversation Corner. And Evo put his email in, Evo Dominguez Jr. at Gmail. And then also Donna, who's our wonderful person who does all of our social media stuff. Donna, wave your hand. That's Donna. She's on our staff and she's wonderful. And she said this will be available as soon as Evo sends it to her at at Holistic RN Certified as soon as we can
On YouTube.
on YouTube. So once again, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And you have a great night. Spring is in the air. And for those of us that are glad that the daffodils are blooming, please go out and smell the daffodils. Have a good night, y'all.
Good night.
Good night. Take care and be well.